In 2019, one of the most powerful brands on earth did something no company had ever dared to do before. It told its own customers they were the problem. Within weeks, millions of people turned on them. Within months, the company lost billions. And it all started with a single sentence: the best men can be. To understand how something like this could even happen, you first need to understand just how powerful this brand really was. Because for over a century, it wasn't just selling razors, it was shaping how men saw themselves. This is where the real story begins. Long before the backlash, long before the outrage, Gillette wasn't just a brand, it was a symbol. For most of the 20th century, if you were a man, there was a good chance your first shave was with the Gillette razor. It was passed down like a ritual. Fathers taught sons, older brothers showed younger brothers. Shaving wasn't just grooming, it was a rite of passage. It all started in 1901, when King Camp Gillette invented the safety razor. Before that, men used straight razors that needed constant sharpening and could easily cut your face open. Gillette's idea was simple but revolutionary. Sell the handle cheap, make the real money on disposable blades. It was the razor and blades business model before anyone even had a name for it. The timing couldn't have been better. When World War I broke out, the US military issued Gillette razors to millions of soldiers. When those soldiers came home, they brought the habit with them. Gillette didn't just gain customers, it gained an entire generation. Over the next 100 years, Gillette did something no competitor ever managed to do. It didn't just dominate shaving, it owned masculinity itself. Their ads weren't about hair on your face, they were about who you were as a man. Athletes, soldiers, CEOs, champions. The message was always the same. Use this razor, and you're not just clean-shaven, you're successful, you're respected, you're winning. In 1989, they locked it in with a single line that became one of the most famous slogans in advertising history: the best a man can get. And men bought into it completely. By the early 2000s, Gillette controlled around 70% of the global razor market. That level of dominance is almost unheard of. They could charge 30 to 40% more than competitors for the same type of product, and nobody questioned it. Drugstores literally had to lock Gillette blades behind plastic cases because they were being stolen so often. That kind of power doesn't go unnoticed. In 2005, Procter & Gamble acquired Gillette for $57 billion, the largest purchase in the company's history. It wasn't just buying a razor brand, it was buying a cultural institution. For over a century, Gillette was untouchable. Competitors came and went, trends changed, technology evolved, but Gillette stayed exactly where it was, on top. Which is why almost nobody saw what was coming next. Because while Gillette was still selling the idea of the perfect man, the world had quietly started moving on, and the first cracks were already forming. At first, it didn't look like a collapse at all. There were no headlines, no scandals, no sudden disasters. On paper, Gillette was still the king. The shelves were still full. The ads were still running. The profits were still massive. But the numbers underneath were starting to tell a different story. Something strange was happening to men. They were shaving less. Not because they couldn't afford razors, but because they didn't want to use them anymore. Beards were coming back into fashion. Not the rough, unkempt kind, but carefully styled, trimmed, and groomed. Facial hair became part of identity again, a statement, a look. YouTube channels popped up teaching men how to grow the perfect beard. Influencers reviewed beard oils, balms, trimmers, and grooming kits. Entire brands appeared that didn't sell razors at all. They sold the tools to keep your beard looking manly. And the data backed it up. Over the decade, the average man's shaving frequency dropped. Men who used to shave almost every day were now doing it a few times a week. Younger men especially. Gen Z and millennials weren't obsessed with clean-shaven faces. They wanted style, individuality, and personality. Quietly, the entire shaving market began shrinking. In the US, manual razor sales started declining year after year. The category that had once seemed immortal was suddenly contracting. Gillette was still on top, but it was now sitting on a melting iceberg. Inside Procter & Gamble, executives could see it happening in real time. Market share was slipping. Revenue in the grooming division was falling. Awareness with younger consumers was dropping. The brand that had defined masculinity for over a century was starting to feel old. Not bad, not broken, just outdated. And that might be the most dangerous position any brand can be in, because when people stop hating you, and they don't even love you anymore, they simply stop caring. Gillette was becoming their father's brand. The razor your dad used, the commercials your dad watched, the logo that felt like it belonged to another era. Advertising couldn't fix that. Better blades couldn't fix that. Lower prices couldn't fix that. The problem wasn't the product. The problem was relevance. And just when Gillette was trying to figure out how to stay young in a world that had moved on, a completely different kind of enemy appeared. One that didn't care about tradition, history, or masculinity at all. They just cared about making razors cheaper. In 2011, while Gillette was still spending millions on glossy commercials and celebrity endorsements, two guys with a camera launched a company from a warehouse. They called it Dollar Shave Club. There was no epic branding, no athletes, no slow-motion shots of water splashing off a perfect jawline, just the founder standing in front of the camera, looking straight into the lens and saying one simple thing: "Our blades are great." The video was raw, sarcastic, and completely self-aware. He walked through a warehouse making jokes, swearing, and mocking the entire razor industry. Why are razors so expensive? Why are they locked behind plastic cases? Why are you paying $20 for something made of metal and plastic? Within 48 hours, the video went viral. Over 12,000 people placed orders. The website crashed. A startup that barely existed had just embarrassed the most powerful razor company on Earth. The pitch was almost insulting in how simple it was. You don't need a fusion-powered hyperblade. You just need something sharp. Pay a few dollars a month and we'll ship it straight to your door. No stores, no middlemen, no branding nonsense. And it worked. Men loved it. Not because the blades were revolutionary, but because the entire experience felt modern. It felt honest. It felt like a company built for people who grew up on the internet, not TV commercials. Then in 2013, another company launched with the same idea: Harry's. Clean design, minimalist branding, direct-to-consumer, affordable pricing. The message was clear. Razors don't need to be a luxury product. For the first time in over a century, Gillette wasn't just competing with other massive corporations, it was being attacked by startups. And Gillette had no idea how to fight that kind of enemy. Their first response was exactly what you'd expect from a giant corporation: discounts, promotions, price cuts. In 2017 alone, blade prices dropped more than 10%. It didn't matter. Sales kept falling anyway. All they managed to do was make less money on products fewer people were buying. Because the real problem wasn't price, it was perception. Dollar Shave Club and Harry's didn't feel like razor companies. They felt like lifestyle brands. Brands that understood humor, culture, and the internet. Brands that talked to customers like humans instead of consumers. Gillette still felt corporate, polished, traditional, safe. In other words, boring. And for a brand built on being the definition of masculinity, boring might as well have been a death sentence. Gillette's leadership finally understood the truth. They weren't losing because their blades were worse, they were losing because their story was. So instead of changing the product, they decided to change the message. Not about razors, about men themselves. And that decision would change everything. By 2018, something strange was happening in marketing. Big brands weren't just selling products anymore. They were selling beliefs. Companies had started taking public positions on social issues. Not quietly, not subtly, but loudly and deliberately. Nike made Colin Kaepernick the face of a global campaign. Patagonia sued the US government over public lands. Dick's Sporting Goods removed certain weapons from its stores after a national tragedy. These weren't small brands chasing attention. These were billion-dollar corporations risking real money on cultural statements. And the data seemed to support it. Surveys showed that most consumers preferred brands that stood for something. Marketing agencies told executives the same thing. Younger generations didn't want faceless corporations. They wanted values, identity, purpose. In other words, if your brand didn't represent a belief, it didn't represent anything at all. At the same time, the world was deep in a cultural shift around masculinity. The Me Too movement had sparked global conversations about male behavior, power, and accountability. Words like toxic masculinity entered mainstream language. The way men were portrayed in media was being questioned, criticized, and redefined in real time. For Gillette, this felt like more than a trend. It felt like an opportunity. For over 100 years, Gillette had positioned itself as the authority on what a man should look like. Their ads had shaped male identity for generations. If anyone had the credibility to speak about masculinity, it was them. At least, that's what leadership believed. Inside Procter & Gamble, executives faced a brutal reality. They were losing younger customers. Their core audience was aging, and their brand felt stuck in the past. They didn't need a better razor, they needed a new meaning. So the idea emerged. Instead of talking about blades, performance, or technology, Gillette would talk about behavior, about respect, about accountability, about what it truly meant to be a good man in modern society. Not the best a man can get, but something more ambitious, the best men can be. It wasn't just a slogan change, it was a complete repositioning of the brand. Gillette partnered with a creative agency and hired a director known for socially driven campaigns. They committed millions to nonprofits focused on helping boys and young men. On paper, it looked thoughtful, progressive, future-focused. The logic was simple. Older customers were already leaving. Beards, subscriptions, startups, that audience was fading anyway. The future belonged to younger, more socially conscious consumers. If Gillette could align itself with their values, it could rebuild relevance from scratch. It was a massive gamble. They weren't just launching an ad, they were redefining what the brand stood for. And in January 2019, they were ready to show the world their new identity. They just didn't realize how differently the world would see it. On January 13, 2019, Gillette uploaded a video to YouTube that would instantly become one of the most controversial advertisements ever made. The film opened quietly. Men stood in front of mirrors, staring at their own reflections. Over the images, audio clips from real news reports played in the background. Stories about bullying, sexual misconduct, the Me Too movement, conversations about toxic masculinity. From the very first seconds, the tone was clear. This wasn't a commercial, it was a message. The video then cut to a series of short scenes, boys fighting while adults stood nearby saying, "Boys will be boys." Men catcalling women on the street. A group of male executives talking over a female colleague in a meeting. A barbecue where men laughed as one of them bragged about chasing women. The pattern was impossible to miss. Every scene showed men behaving badly, either as bullies, harassers, or silent bystanders. Halfway through the film, actor Terry Crews appeared in footage from his real-life congressional testimony. He spoke directly to the camera about accountability, about men needing to hold other men responsible for their actions. Only near the end did the tone finally shift. A father stepped in to stop his son from bullying another kid. A man intervened when he saw street harassment. Young boys were shown learning respect, empathy, and self-control. And then the screen faded to black. The best men can be. The entire video ran for almost 2 minutes. Not a single razor appeared. No product shots, no features, no technology, no price. Just a global brand using its platform to deliver a moral message about masculinity. From a creative standpoint, it was bold, emotional, cinematic. From a psychological standpoint, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Because for most of the ad, viewers weren't being inspired, they were being accused. The first minute and a half focused almost entirely on negative behavior. The positive examples came only at the very end, and they felt small compared to the avalanche of criticism that came before. The underlying message wasn't subtle. Men, as a group, were part of the problem, and the company delivering that message was the same company that had spent decades profiting from aggressive, competitive, hyper-masculine imagery, the same brand that sponsored boxing matches, football leagues, and action heroes. Now, that brand had positioned itself as a moral authority, not a razor company, a teacher. And for millions of men watching, that shift didn't feel empowering. It felt like being lectured by a stranger who had suddenly decided they knew better than you. The ad wasn't just redefining masculinity, it was redefining the relationship between Gillette and its customers. And that relationship was about to collapse in real time. The reaction was instant. Within hours of the video going live, the comment section turned into a war zone. Thousands of messages flooded in from angry viewers. Men accused Gillette of calling them bullies, predators, and abusers. Others said the company had lost touch with reality. Some declared they were done with the brand forever. By the end of the first week, the video had racked up hundreds of thousands of dislikes. It was on its way to becoming one of the most disliked ads in YouTube history. Then the hashtag appeared. Hashtag boycott Gillette. It started on Twitter, but quickly spread everywhere. Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Instagram. Men filmed themselves throwing Gillette razors into the trash. Some burned them. Some snapped them in half. Others posted long videos explaining why they felt personally attacked by a company they had supported for decades. Reaction channels exploded. YouTubers made hour-long breakdowns of the ad. Conservative commentators framed it as an attack on masculinity itself. Clips of the commercial were dissected line by line, frame by frame. Every scene was analyzed, criticized, and memed. One tweet in particular went viral. British journalist Piers Morgan, who had millions of followers at the time, wrote that he had used Gillette razors his entire adult life, but this absurd virtue signaling might finally drive him away to a company that wasn't eager to fuel the global assault on masculinity. That single post became a rallying cry. Suddenly, this wasn't just about razors, it was about culture, politics, identity. The ad had turned into a symbol for a much larger argument about modern society and how men were being portrayed in media. Gillette tried to stay quiet at first. They issued a short statement saying they wanted to spark positive conversations, that they believed in holding themselves to a higher standard. YouTubers made hour-long breakdowns of the ad. Conservative commentators framed it as an attack on masculinity itself. Clips of the commercial were dissected line by line, frame by frame. Every scene was analyzed, criticized, and memed. One tweet in particular went viral. British journalist Piers Morgan, who had millions of followers at the time, wrote that he had used Gillette razors his entire adult life, but this absurd virtue signaling might finally drive him away to a company that wasn't eager to fuel the global assault on masculinity. That single post became a rallying cry. Suddenly, this wasn't just about razors, it was about culture, politics, identity. The ad had turned into a symbol for a much larger argument about modern society and how men were being portrayed in media. Gillette tried to stay quiet at first. They issued a short statement saying they wanted to spark positive conversations, that they believed in holding themselves to a higher standard. It didn't help. The more they defended the ad, the angrier the backlash became. Eventually, the company did something almost unheard of for a global brand. They disabled the YouTube comments entirely. Not long after, the original video quietly disappeared from their main channel. No announcement, no apology, no explanation. Just gone. By that point, the damage was already done. What started as a 2-minute commercial had turned into a worldwide cultural controversy. Late-night talk shows discussed it. News outlets wrote think pieces about it. Marketing blogs called it either brilliant or brand suicide. And while some people praised Gillette for taking a stand, the loudest voices, the ones dominating the conversation, were furious. These weren't random internet trolls. They were loyal customers. Men who had been buying Gillette products for 10, 20, even 30 years. And now, for the first time in the company's history, those customers weren't just ignoring the brand, they were actively turning against it. But all of this was still just noise. Outrage, tweets, dislikes, boycotts. None of it mattered unless it showed up in one place. The only place corporations truly care about. The numbers. And that's when things got real. At first, Procter & Gamble acted like nothing had changed. Publicly, the company stayed calm. No apologies, no panic. But inside the earnings reports, the damage was clear. Within 6 months, Gillette's grooming division saw sales drop by hundreds of millions. Market share slipped again, falling from near 65% to just over 60%. And the customers weren't disappearing. They were switching. Dollar Shave Club and Harry's gained users. Even Schick started pulling former Gillette buyers. Then came the moment that shocked Wall Street. During a 2019 earnings call, P&G announced an $8 billion write-down on the Gillette brand. Not a fine, not a loss, a write-down, meaning the company officially admitted Gillette was no longer worth what it once was. The official explanation blamed competition and changing habits. The ad was never mentioned, but the timing said everything. When the backlash peaked, many expected Gillette to apologize. Instead, the head of P&G's grooming division doubled down, calling the losses a price worth paying. He argued that modern brands must risk upsetting some people to build loyalty with others. The strategy was deliberate. Gillette was willing to lose older customers in order to attract younger, more progressive ones. On the surface, it worked. Traffic spiked, mentions exploded, awareness hit record levels. But attention didn't translate into sales. Surveys showed most viewers liked the message, yet less than half said it made them want to buy Gillette products. Even worse, over half the engaged audience was female, people who weren't even shopping for men's razors. Gillette won the conversation, but lost the customer. In the end, Gillette didn't fail because it took a stand. It failed because it took that stand against the wrong people. They targeted an audience that would praise the message, not one that would buy the product. They confused cultural relevance with product relevance, and worst of all, they framed their existing customers as the problem. Nike could turn sneakers into symbols because shoes are public, they're worn to be seen. Razors are private, they're used in bathrooms, alone, with no audience. Some products carry identity, others just solve problems. Gillette tried to turn a utility into a movement, and paid billions for the lesson. Because at the end of the day, you can lecture your customers, you can inspire them, you can even start global conversations. But someone still has to buy the razor.